2017 was a pretty extreme year. Games that came out were either astoundingly excellent or painfully mediocre. This year saw a ton of games releasing that were, at the very least, worth talking about. For this year's Game of the Year video, I'm gonna go ahead and only do a top 5 with honorable mentions preceding them. I've decided to do a top 5 instead of a top 10 because I personally felt the bottom half of a top 10 list gets pretty muddled. What really makes the 9th best game better than the 10th best? To me, that conversation is way too vague for me to warrant even having it. Anyways, with that being said, let's get into this year's honorable mentions. So I'd like to start off by talking about 2 really good remasters that came out this year. Now, obviously since they're remasters they could never place on the top 10 or a top 5, but I still felt like they were worth getting some kind of mention. So the first remaster I'd like to talk about is Final Fantasy XII The Zodiac Age. This is an excellent remaster of a pretty polarizing game, and I would only recommend playing it if the Gambit system sounds interesting. Look up the Gambit system and how it functions in the game, and if it sounds interesting to you then I highly recommend playing through Final Fantasy XII. It's got some really good characterization apart from Vaughn, and it's got a really intriguing story, of like almost Shakespearean level of like warring nations and intertwining family relations and all kinds of crazy stuff. So if that Gambit system sounds interesting to you, then I highly recommend checking out Final Fantasy XII The Zodiac Age. And then up next is StarCraft Brood War Remastered. I mean, I just have to mention that this game exists, and that if you aren't aware that it exists, I highly recommend you check it out, because StarCraft Brood War to this day is still one of the best games to ever be released. It is easily the best esport, and I honestly just needed to mention this game and thank Blizzard for breathing life back into Brood War. Alright, now let's get into the actual honorable mentions. So the first honorable mention is kind of a meme game, but it's Bennett Foddy's Getting Over It. I played about 5 hours of this game, and I got to the staircase after the slide, and something about the simplicity of this game and the way it's sort of a meta game, referencing game design all throughout it, something about it just tickled me in a way that not a lot of games this year did, so I highly recommend giving Getting Over It at least a chance. You don't have to beat it, but I really do recommend just checking it out. Next up is Sonic Mania. Now, I should preface this by saying I hate Sonic games, and Sonic Mania is no exception. I really did not enjoy playing Sonic Mania, but I can appreciate and respect what it's doing. For all intents and purposes, this is a phenomenal Sonic game. It is just a love letter to the older games, and if you like Sonic games, especially the older ones, you're gonna love Sonic Mania. Plus it's got some amazing music, like come on. But yeah, check out Sonic Mania if you haven't. And moving on from there, I'd like to mention Ruiner. Now, Ruiner to me is a game that could have been in the top 5 had it been executed just a little bit better. It has phenomenal art, it has fantastic music, and the style comes together in a way that was really impressive. However, the gameplay is just not quite there. It was incredibly frustrating playing on the hardest difficulty, which the developers recommended, and it was so frustrating that they had to actually nerf the game, so really frustrating gameplay that doesn't quite click the way like a Hotline Miami did, but still, I recommend giving it a shot. It's not a super long game, and the style is really something to behold. Moving on from there, I'd like to talk about Nioh, which I feel really bad for because it just barely didn't make my top 5 list. Nioh, I said it in my review and I'll say it again, is just such a beautiful evolution of the Souls formula, and I really hope moving forward that people take sort of note of how to progress the Souls formula without just outright ripping it off and redoing it all over again. Nioh really was a breath of fresh air when it comes to Souls games, and that's seriously impressive considering that there were 5 Souls games preceding it. So, if you like Souls games, I highly recommend Nioh. And next up on the list we have Prey. Now, I honestly was not expecting to enjoy this game as much as I did. That first half of the game is truly something spectacular. The way they established the setting and the tone of that game was seriously amazing. That first hour was absolutely riveting and I could not get enough of it. However, the combat throughout the game was really lackluster. It felt tacked on. I understand that it needed to be in the game, but I felt like it could have been executed far better. And The game needed to end about 5 hours before it actually did end. It went on way too long for what it was, and ultimately that ended up souring the whole experience for me, unfortunately, and is what kept it off of the top 5 list. But still, I highly recommend playing through that game. Not super long, and a really, really interesting setting. Then we got Nier Automata, and it's well written. That's about it. And then moving on from there, we have Xenoblade Chronicles 2. Now, this game is weird to me because nothing about it stands out. It's just kind of acceptable across the board, but for some reason it was compelling enough to me that I sunk like 20 to 30 hours into it. But ultimately, I did fall off eventually. The combat just got a little too repetitive, and I don't know, it just lost its flair and its flavor as the game went on. But if this game seems interesting to you, because it did not seem interesting at all to me, if it's interesting to you from the get-go, then you'll probably be hooked for all 80 hours of the game. So check it out if it seems interesting to you. Now, my final honorable mention is a game that's probably going to surprise a lot of people, because for some people this is their game of the year, and I respect that and I understand that. But for me, this game didn't quite land as hard as it did for other people, and the game I'm referring to is Super Mario Odyssey. For some reason, playing through this game, everything to me just struck me as, it's good. Yeah, Super Mario Odyssey. How would I describe it? It's a good game. It's a good Mario game. And that's about it. It doesn't really do anything to further itself in terms of quality beyond being just good, in my opinion. Throughout the entire game, I enjoyed myself, but I'm never gonna play that game again. I beat it, I got to the darker side, I got 520 some odd moons, and I just feel no urge to go back to it, to re-experience it. Now, I'm not trying to knock this game and say that it's bad, or that if you enjoy it you have bad taste, or whatever, but to me, there were 5 better games that came out this year. There were 6 better games that came out this year if we're counting Nioh. Honestly, Odyssey is just a really good Mario game to me, and 5 other games came out that were better than it. Still, it's a great game, and you should experience it, and you should play it. So, if you have a Switch and you haven't played Odyssey, what are you doing? Play through that game. Alright, so now that we've gotten through all the honorable mentions, now we can get into the meat of the list. So let's get into the top 5 games of 2017. Now, for my number 5 spot, this is most likely going to be a controversial pick. Not only is it going above Super Mario Odyssey, but it's also an expansion pack to a game that came out last year. However, I enjoyed myself so much playing this game that I simply had to put it on the list. My number 5 spot goes to XCOM 2 War of the Chosen. XCOM 2 was a game that was marred by a ton of problems on release. A majority of them were technical, but it also had its host of design issues as well. War of the Chosen is a blanket fix to every single negative trait XCOM 2 had. Not only does it add, but it expands the pre-existing mechanics of the original game in such a beautiful way that I was easily able to sink 80 plus hours into this game all over again. War of the Chosen was able to refine XCOM 2's gameplay to a razor-fine point. Before the expansion, XCOM 2 wasn't quite sure what it wanted to be. It tried to evoke the feeling of scrappily fighting against a much stronger enemy, but it didn't quite hit the mark in that regard. With the host of changes that War of the Chosen introduced, it succeeds in turning XCOM 2 into the guerrilla alien warfare simulator that it always wanted to be. But it's not even the gameplay changes that made War of the Chosen so fantastic. All of the flavor that came with it also helped to flesh out the experience. Propaganda posters may seem like a silly addition, but it really does add that extra layer of immersion when you go on a mission and see your best squad posted up on a wall in the middle of a rundown, alien-occupied city. Even after losing countless runs that I've sunk numerous hours into, I still want to go back to War of the Chosen. It is exceptionally rare that we get to see such a good expansion pack these days. War of the Chosen sets a new standard for what I've come to expect from post-game content packs. And for that, it has earned my number 5 spot. How could I not put such a wonderful experience on this list? Cuphead is everything that video games should be. Simple, fun, and jam-packed to the brim with beauty. I mean, honestly, what is there to say about this game that hasn't already been said? Cuphead controls exceptionally well, it looks goddamn gorgeous, and it's got one of the most memorable soundtracks to come out this year. Everything gels together and manages to turn Cuphead into a truly magical experience that captured that wonderful joy of enjoying a damn good video game. It was also incredibly rejuvenating playing a game that actually put me on my ass a couple of times. Developers these days seem to be shying away from making challenging games, but Cuphead has absolutely no qualms about knocking you senseless. The game isn't hard just to be hard, but instead it's just hard enough for you to feel an overwhelming sense of joy and satisfaction when you finally down a boss. However, while Cuphead is an exceptionally tight experience, it's very limited in scope. It's really just a boss rush game with shoehorned platforming sections. That's all it is. It doesn't push the envelope in terms of gameplay. It's kinda sorta just a really good side-scroller. But man, it is a really good side-scroller. Other games on this list push their genres to the absolute limit, innovating in ways that will leave a lasting impact on the industry for the foreseeable future. Cuphead will be remembered for being a gorgeous game that played extremely well, but no one is going to recall it for what it did to push side-scrollers forward as a genre. However, what Cuphead lacks in genre-defying innovation, it makes up for with resounding overall quality. I have never enjoyed CRPGs. I always find them far too tedious and way too much of a time investment for what ultimately amounts to a subpar experience. But this game grabbed me from the word go and did not release me from its grasp until I had beaten it. My number 3 spot for this year goes to Divinity Original Sin 2. So much can be said about what this game does well, but ultimately it comes back to how streamlined this entire experience is. One of my complaints about CRPGs is that they always feel long-winded. Conversations go on for far too long and separate the gameplay from the story in a way that always feels tiresome. I like to say that Divinity fixes this issue by dumbing down the way it tells its story. Instead of paragraphs upon paragraphs of unvoiced text being flung at you, Divinity opts to cut down its text to a couple sentences at most. On top of that, the game goes out of its way to voice every single line of dialogue except your character's voice. These simple changes made the entire bulk of this game far more palatable for me and allowed me to finally sink my teeth into a CRPG. Divinity is so much more than just a streamlined game though, because beneath its shiny coat lies an incredibly complex and enjoyable combat system. Divinity 2's combat system gives off the impression that it's fairly simplistic. All of the rules are easily understood, and there aren't any crazy mechanics that need explaining. If you've played a video game, then you can probably understand everything Divinity throws at you. However, what makes this combat so much goddamn fun is that it's simple to pick up and exceptionally difficult to master. Every fight needs to be thought through. You never get to a point where you just bowl over everything in your way. The combat also offers a ton of variety as well. I played through the game with a predominantly physical damage-based lineup. There were classes I didn't even touch that could have completely altered the way I played the game. The combat Divinity 2 offered was the glue that held it together. Had this game not been as enjoyable to play as it was, then I would not have made it past the second hour. What really impressed me with this game though was the simple fact that it functions in a logically consistent universe. Since the first time I picked up a game, I've been conditioned to think a certain way when it comes to interacting with a game's world. Divinity throws those rules out the window. Everything works everywhere. You see a chest on a ledge that you can't get to? Well, if this were a Final Fantasy game, then you'd have to find the secret path that leads to it in order to get it. In Divinity 2, you just teleport the chest to your feet. Was there a secret path leading to that chest? Probably, but the fact that you can circumvent it by applying the game's logic to its world really blew me away. Honestly, Divinity Original Sin 2 was an enthralling ride. Every second of the game felt fresh and exciting as my characters leveled up and unlocked new ways to approach each fight. The story also worked well enough to keep me interested in everything else in between the fights. If you haven't given this game a shot, I implore you to look into it, as it was the most fun I have ever had with a CRPG. Where to even begin with this game? I guess I should start by saying that it's the most stylish game I have ever played. Persona 5 is distinct in the fact that it does not look like anything else on the market. When I say that Persona 5 is a Japanese RPG with visual novel aspects, you probably imagine it to look like something off of DeviantArt like our good friend Xenoblade Chronicles 2. Persona 5 could not distance itself further from its stylistic JRPG trappings even if it wanted to. Instead of being treated to generic moe garbage, you're greeted with a velvety, smooth, sleek, suave game with style oozing out of every single orifice. Persona 5 does such an immaculate job of capturing a modern-day, big city Japan while also instilling its undertones of espionage and rebellion. There wasn't a single frame of this game that didn't have style dripping off of it. The music in Persona 5 is also amazing, as always. Persona games have pretty high standards when it comes to their soundtracks, and Persona 5 drops some of the hottest tracks the series has ever seen. It took me 90 hours to beat this game, and all throughout it I was listening to Last Surprise and Beneath the Mask. Imagine hearing the same two songs constantly throughout a 90-hour journey. In any other game, it would have gotten tedious by the 10-hour mark. Instead, even now, after having beaten the game, I'm writing the script down while listening to songs off the Persona 5 soundtrack. Of course, the gameplay is also as good as ever. It may not reach levels of complexity that Divinity might have, but even still, the combat in Persona 5 was good enough to keep those 90 hours exciting around every turn. I also touched on this in my review, but it really does need to be reiterated how well the devs learned from their previous games. All of the additions to this game were wholly positive. I don't really miss anything about the previous games, because Persona 5 does everything they do bigger and better. The cast of characters is also as lovable as ever. Ryuji and Yusuke grew on me throughout the game, and at the end I was sad to see them go. Anna and Makoto were drab, but they also had some memorable moments along the way. Sojiro's arc was one of the best in the Persona series, and the game's villains were some of the best yet. What ultimately put this game over Divinity, though, was how well everything comes together. To me, Persona 5 would not have worked as well as it did if it didn't feel like a whole unit. Had the music faltered, or had the characters not been as endearing as they were, then this game would have slowly unraveled for me the longer I spent with it. Instead, it comes together in a way that is truly remarkable, as I don't think I have ever played a game as thematically and tonally consistent as Persona 5. Persona 5 was, in every sense of the word, a journey. Along the way I was treated to a lovable cast of friends, some of the best music this generation, and one of the most beautiful games I have ever had the pleasure of playing. Much like The Witness last year, I believe that this game stands head and shoulders above everything else that was released this year. No game, to me, reached the same heights that this game did. The Legend of Zelda: Breath of the Wild is my Game of the Year for 2017. Oftentimes when we talk about what makes a video game good, we say that it's got really enjoyable gameplay, or the story is exceptionally engaging and well thought out. It is incredibly rare that a game comes along and revolutionizes the way we view an entire genre. Breath of the Wild is the best open world game I have ever played. Moving forward, developers will be studying this game in order to better understand how to make a compelling open world. For that reason alone, it has earned the #1 spot on my list. Nintendo took a good, hard look at the open world genre and fixed damn near every single issue those games tend to have. On top of that, they introduced their own concepts which fit beautifully into this genre. To me, nothing epitomizes Breath of the Wild's design philosophy better than the towers. In Ubisoft games, it's almost a bit of a running joke that there's going to be towers you climb to unlock more of the world map as well as a fast travel point. It's all but expected at this point that if it's an open world game, then it is going to have some kind of tower you need to climb to uncover stuff on your map. Of course, Breath of the Wild follows suit. However, Nintendo utilizes this mechanic in a way that is an absolutely immaculate example of proper video game design. With Breath of the Wild being an open world game, the player is going to have certain preconceived notions about what to expect from it. If you see a large tower in the distance, you know that once you climb it, it is going to unveil more of the map and unlock a fast travel point. When you get to the top of the tower though, that's when you understand that these towers aren't just here to unveil the map. Once you climb your first tower, something will click in your head, and whether you notice it consciously or subconsciously doesn't matter, because you will notice it. As soon as you reach the top of the tower, you will have an excellent vantage point over the entire world. This is the point where you take out your binoculars and start to mark things that you want to explore. In any other game, once you hit that activate tower button, your world map would have popped open and a mess of icons would litter your map and overload you to the point where you just don't care. In Breath of the Wild, you climb to the top of a tower and you use that height to figure out where you're going to go next. The tower has a physical and logical purpose in this world. It isn't just a button you press to unlock more icons on your map. It is a tool you utilize to get a better grasp of your surroundings. This is just a single example of the myriad of things that Nintendo has done to further the open world formula. Nintendo made so many simple, minute changes which all have a similar effect. Another example would be Korok seeds, which are peppered throughout the world in a way that you always organically stumble upon them, and they never turn into icons that you hunt down on your minimap. Breath of the Wild is chock full of these downright incredible amounts of insight. These moments are what help to make this game the most enjoyable experience of the year. Earlier I mentioned how when people often discuss why a game is good, it's often due to executing well on the fundamentals of video game design. Breath of the Wild is not exempt from this claim, as it is also a fundamentally excellent game. All of the games on this list are, but Breath of the Wild went that extra step and turned itself into a game that will further its genre and redefine what it means to be an open world game. To me, that easily makes Breath of the Wild my game of the year for 2017.